Welcome to A Case of the Mondays, a podcast by 3R Strategy. We are a pay and reward consultancy supporting organisations of all sizes and sectors to take a fair and equitable approach to pay, communicated clearly and honestly to employees. In this podcast, we invite experts to discuss some of the most pressing issues in the world of HR, culture and leadership. We're keen to explore how we can all work to overcome and navigate these challenges. So, tune in to explore how you could create an environment where people don't just have to come to work, but want to.
Hi everyone, welcome back to the podcast. I'm your host Rameez, founder and director of 3R Strategy and author of Case of the Mondays. Today we'll be exploring how organizations can get the best return on investment from their employee benefits. I was actually speaking to a client recently who wanted to see how they can align their benefits with their business goals and budgets while meeting employee needs. So I'm delighted today that I'm joined by Emma Cowling, an employee benefits consultant who specializes in creating cost-effective, engaging, and impactful benefit solutions. Emma, welcome to the podcast. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
So before we get into discussing benefits in more detail, can you share a bit about your journey into the world of employee benefits? Because many of us that work in pay or benefits, reward, it's not really something that you really know about when you were in school or university.
Yeah.
So how did you get into specializing in employee benefits?
Yeah, no, exactly. So I actually started off doing payroll, which is definitely not something that you kind of go through school aspiring to do. So I kind of fell into that, working for Estee Lauder, and really kind of enjoyed the pay side of it. And then that, as I kind of career developed and moved around different roles, to transition from just doing solely payroll to compensation being added in and then benefits being added in. And I really kind of fell in love with the benefits side of things and moved to kind of solely kind of standalone benefits roles, because I think for me it's really interesting to see the amount of creativity that you can have with benefits. I think, definitely from a payroll point of view, but with compensation, you can sometimes, you have pay bandings and your budget. Whereas with benefits, you can take that budget and really work it to what the employee demographics like, what the employees value, the company values, and also, by just using communication and changing the way that you talk about the benefits can have a massive impact. So for me, it's really interesting to kind of see the impact that the benefits have, and seeing, kind of going from into companies that have got kind of issues with benefits and then turning that around just by communicating about them and then seeing the reaction from employees is really, for me, really helps me kind of see the purpose of the role that I'm doing. So yeah, that's how I kind of got into benefits and specialised in that area.
Okay. I mean, that's really interesting because we're seeing a lot of organizations that are struggling with budgets at the moment. And, if you have a very small budget and you use it for pay increases, that doesn't really amount to much from an employee's perspective with the monthly increase in their pay. So there's obviously a lot that you can do around benefits, but what are some of the biggest opportunities that you think organizations have when looking at their benefits? Because often when I speak to clients at a very high level, this one of the things I might mention to them is around their pension, because the senior leadership team that's generally slightly older, that really value their benefits, but the Gen Z don't necessarily value the the pension in the same way. And so is it a good return on their investment? So what do you think about that? What should organizations do on that side? But are there other opportunities that you see organizations have when or the biggest opportunities you see for organizations?
Yeah, and I think pensions is a really interesting one, like you raised, because obviously so much of it is down to the kind of the age of the employee and also the gender as well. You kind of see this gender split between men and women, and there's a huge kind of issue around gender pension gap, which is something else we can kind of get onto later perhaps. But I think in terms of pension, it's really interesting. I think auto enrollment it's obviously been an amazing thing for companies and for employees to kind of actually, focus on the pension. But what I've also seen is companies just almost stop talking about it because they have to do pay a certain amount into the pension. They've then stopped communicating as much, from what I've seen with companies that, they're not kind of saying, actually, this is potentially a huge proportion of your pay that you're getting as part of the pension. So, and that then, employees aren't getting the communication, so they're much less engaged. They're kind of relying on the default fund for the pension rather than looking at their own kind of risk profile around how they're investing their pensions. And also, the other thing that we're kind of seeing is that there's not then employees looking to increase their pension contributions. They're just kind of being auto-enrolled into the pension, and then that's the kind of the last step, but they don't take any action. So I think there's definitely a huge piece around the communication of the pensions that companies can do to help employees see the value of that. And like you say, with the kind of the Gen Z that are coming through, it may feel like a really long time off, but it does, it comes around quite quickly. And the younger that you can go into your pension and use that, you then don't have to invest as much later on when you're trying to catch up on missed investments earlier. So yeah, I think there's a huge piece around the communication from a pension point of view to get some return on investment on that. But I think in terms of other benefits that you kind of see huge return on investment, and the first one is holiday purchase, which is by far the most popular benefit when it's implemented within a company, and it actually saves the company money. They're saying saving on the salary budget if they're not having to backfill the person if it's not kind of a service industry or customer facing position. And they're also saving on national insurance as well. So I think there's a huge amount that can be saved in terms of that. And that really kind of appeals, as we're kind of saying, like the different demographics, that appeals from, people that are just starting off their career all the way through to people coming to the end of their career that are looking to potentially like reduce their hours. So I think there's a huge amount that can be saved in terms of that. Also, I see companies, not necessarily wanting to implement it because it's like, oh, we'll have to do holiday sell as well as holiday buy. But I think that can be framed from a well-being point of view. Actually, we want you to take more time off. We're concerned, like we care about your well-being, and so much of the benefits communications is putting a story behind that of why this is important to the company that you take additional holiday. And I think as well from that, for the holiday purchase, not only is it one of the most popular benefits that companies can have, it also helps to reduce things like unplanned absence because people are less burnt out, they're able to take more time off, so they're not having like additional sick days, or potentially they're just feeling like they just don't want to go into work that day. It helps people plan. So I think that's one of the things that I'm definitely seeing a lot with my clients that I'm working with at the moment is benefits aren't just for the benefit of employees, they're actually for the benefit of the company as well. So take, for example, medical insurance, which is kind of almost seen as a bit of a nice to have other than for kind of more senior positions. Whereas now when you're kind of seeing the issues with the NHS and waiting lists and employees actually taking much longer off work or are in work but worried about conditions. So actually the investment of potentially £800 per person to put them into private medical insurance means that there's a lot less absence and there's a lot more productivity. So again, it's like looking at it from it's not just benefiting the employee, it's benefiting the company as well. So additional thing like life insurance as well, it's there to kind of protect the company if something were to happen to an employee, so that they were being looked after they pass away. And I think so I think they're the kind of like the more traditional benefits, but then looking at other benefits, so the kind of quirkier ones, I think things like birthday days off are really interesting because it's quite a low cost to the company to offer that benefit. Whereas, when someone starts working, when you can get a list of benefits like, okay, you've got medical insurance and life insurance, it's all quite dry. Whereas if you can offer things like birthday days off, things like paternity leave, so when someone gets a new pet, they can really, for a really low cost, kind of like start to add a bit more kind of interest and a bit more variety into the benefits rather than it being, the kind of traditional and insured benefits. So I think those kind of benefits maybe won't get a huge take up of things like paternity leave, but it can have a huge impact on making and helping the employer stand out against competition when going through recruitment.
I think, like you said, it is a great way of demonstrating your values as an employer as well. Because when you highlight and you you're saying to your employees that, you might just be a small percentage of people that are impacted by something, but you are taking the time or you're investing in something like that.
Yeah. And that's something as well that I see lots, is that companies, have all these values of like, we care about well-being, we care about gender, but then the benefits don't necessarily stack up against that. So you could like have all the kind of amazing stuff and things about gender, but then don't have things like maternity leave or paternity leave other than statutory. So, and again, like the well-being side, it's like, okay, we care about your well-being, but we don't offer medical insurance or health cash plans or anything from the health side. Equally, trying to think of other examples. So
what's your view around, because you talked about private medical or medical insurance. Obviously it's a much more expensive, usually it's the most expensive benefit for most organizations. So not everyone, for example, is able to afford that for all employees.
Yeah.
Versus a health cash plan, which is probably more utilized by employees because you don't need a specific illness, for example, in order to access it. You can do it for glasses or regular appointments. How do you see those two going together? Is it one or the other? Is there more demand for one of those benefits?
Yeah, so I think, I like you say, I think there's obviously some companies that don't have the budget to spend the money on the medical insurance. And I think the health cash plan is a really, really amazing product that for as little as kind of under £100 per person per year, like you say, you can have money back towards optical, dental, physiotherapy. Also, so I've seen some really good cash plans that offer things like gym discounts, shopping discounts, employee assistance programs. So just from offering that one product, you've got the kind of foundations of a really good well-being strategy that you can then build upon. So I think I've seen both. So I've seen them kind of offered separately, but I've also seen them offered together because, there's not a huge amount of overlap necessarily between the two products, that they can really kind of sit well together. And I think, as we kind of mentioned slightly earlier, in terms of kind of bang for your buck for benefits, like the health cash plan for £100 per year per person can save employees potentially £1,000. So I think as we start looking at the kind of the total reward picture, I think that's quite interesting because, like we say, after tax, if an employee is, looking to spend like maybe £1,000 per person in their salary, after tax, there's a really small impact on their actual pay packet. Whereas actually for things like benefits for £100, you can do something that impacts all employees because everyone's, using dental and potentially optical as well during the year. But can have for £100 cost to the company, it can impact the employee for £1,000 in their kind of pocket. So I think there's, at the moment, whilst companies are really struggling with additional salary costs and national insurance increases, benefits can be a really good way of not only offering employees more, but then kind of having that values piece as well of saying, we care about you, this is why we're offering this. And also, from an employee engagement point of view and attraction point of view. So, for a very little amount of money, you can offer a really interesting benefits package. And then you can obviously build on that with things like medical insurance if there's the budget to kind of spend on that too.
What do you think are well, let's pick one. What do you think is the biggest mistake that organizations are making when putting together their benefits packages for employees? Something that you see over and over again and you try and speak to them about changing something that they're doing?
Yeah, so what I see lots, and actually there's a few different things that I kind of see. So I think the biggest mistake that companies make is just renewing year after year with the same provider. So they'll, do the piece of work up front where they choose like medical insurer, for example, and then when it comes to renewals, there'll be a 20-30% increase. They'll continue using that provider. They don't necessarily use brokers to kind of help them save money on that. And then the costs just escalate and escalate. Because if you're having a 20-30% increase on costs year on year, then obviously within a few years that almost potentially comes untenable to offer that benefit anymore. So I think just having a review of the provider, looking at other providers within the market and purchasing the benefits in a different way can save a huge amount of money on the benefits. But some of the other issues that I kind of see as well is by doing that, you're not necessarily making or taking advantage of all the additional things. So lots of insurers at the moment are offering additional benefits. So things like virtual GPs, employee assistance programs as part of the other insurances. Whereas if you're just using the same provider and not having conversations, you're not necessarily aware of those additional benefits. So I think there's a huge piece around doing a review of what's in place and how it's been purchased. But the other things that I see are companies, as part of their onboarding, they'll talk about benefits, but then they don't mention benefits again during the whole kind of employee life cycle, which is kind of essentially kind of wasting the money. Like if you're not going to talk about them regularly and keep employees engaged with them, then they don't know what benefits they've got or how to use them. So I think the communication piece is huge as well. So, typically what I see when I kind of do the benefits reviews and audits is you can save typically around 10-20% on the benefits costs just by looking at how it's purchased and not duplicating products. So say, for example, like employee assistance programs that are included as part of the insurances, but they're being purchased additionally on top of that. And then with the communications, I typically see 20-30% increase, even 40% in one of the companies I worked with, increase in employee engagement just by changing the way that the employees were spoken to about the benefits and kind of adding that value piece in there as well of, telling a story of like, we offer these benefits because we care about you and because we want you to keep healthy and fit, which then, changes how the employees see their relationship with the employer as well. So it's, as part of it, like, this is why for me it's like really interesting to do these reviews, because often can save so much money and also improve things for employees as well at the same time.
So do you think that organizations should be doing that review or speaking to a broker on an annual basis, or is it every 2 years or 3 years?
Yeah, so I think it's good to have a conversation, and it's definitely important to use a broker to speak to the providers for you and to get them to do all the kind of work, because I think, especially with medical insurance, what you see is when you first get the initial renewal quote, you can then, just by pushing back a little bit, you get a discount rate straight away by having a broker in place. So they can definitely, it's definitely important to have them there for every annual renewal cycle. I think in terms of the review, it's probably something you want to do every 2-3 years. I think if it's done properly and kind of future-proofed of like, okay, these are the things that are coming down the line over the next year or 2 years, you don't necessarily need to go into that kind of level of detail on an annual basis. But I think it definitely is important to have that kind of light touch of just someone looking over the benefits on an annual basis. It doesn't need to be like the kind of, like I say, the full review.
And do you see any differences if you work with organizations across different sectors? So if you work with an organization in the retail sector versus working with an organization in the media sector or technology sector, are there typically differences in how they're managing their benefits, or do you think it tends to be more around the size of the organization? So if you have, for example, 50 employees, then you might be investing or might be able to invest less in your benefits than if you have 500 employees. So where do you tend to see more differences in benefits, or is it quite consistent?
Yeah, so no, I think it's a really good question, because I think it varies very much between the sectors. So I suppose potentially this could be changing as the markets change, but you typically see things like technology companies have huge amount of budget that they can have all these amazing kind of wealth of benefits and the technology systems that can then allow employees to have flexible benefits and purchase benefits in different ways. So you kind of see potentially more high levels of budget and investment in the kind of larger tech organizations. From a kind of retail point of view, you kind of see there's a kind of typically a much wider demographic depending on the retailer. So within that kind of area, you see typically there's less spend per head on the retail staff, and potentially there might be then a different set of benefits depending on different levels within the business. But they typically within retail, there's a bit more focus on, like we're saying, kind of health cash plans rather than private medical insurance, and looking at discounts and ways for employees to kind of save money and maximise the money that they've got. I think from a not-for-profit point of view, you typically see that, again, there's not a huge amount of money to spend on the benefits, but the benefits that are used are far more values-driven and more purposeful. So things like volunteering days and charity donations and more ethical benefits rather than, and potentially going back to the pensions, you kind of see those companies looking at, rather than having a kind of standard default fund, they may have a more ethical investments rather than something that's kind of investing in something that potentially for the charities like working against them. So I think, yeah, you definitely see a very much a kind of a difference between what the companies offer. There are some really strong threads that kind of run through all of that, and we're seeing a lot around the kind of mental health and well-being at the moment that, I think that any support that companies can give, so whether that's via an employee assistance program, which doesn't just help with the kind of mental health, it can also help with any kind of legal or financial problems that people have got, financial education, because obviously the cost of living, that everyone's feeling the crunch of that. So I think anything that kind of help from a well-being point of view, I'm seeing that across all of the different industries. And again, in terms of company size, that obviously does make a factor that if you've got thousands of employees, there is an expectation from employees that the benefits would be better than if they were working for a smaller company. But then you're probably more likely to see a bit of a different bandings of different employees getting different levels of benefits between the different levels of employees within larger organizations.
Yeah, that's really interesting because, you talked about the retail sector versus the technology sector, and you were talking about demographics, because that obviously has a big impact on what the employees prefer to have in terms of benefits. Because, we did some research a while ago to look at different generations and what are the benefits that they prefer. And there's quite a big difference, particularly when it comes to Gen Z employees. So I think it makes sense for an organization to look at their own employee population and say, what percentage of our employees are, for example, Gen Z? Is it 40% of our employees? And if so, why don't we have any benefits that they value? Because you can see that they sometimes think, oh, we have a very generous pension scheme, but those 40% of Gen Z are really not seeing any value in it. Whereas it's a very expensive, again, investment within the pension scheme. So let's say we are, you're speaking to an organization that has all of these different benefits, and they want to know, am I getting a good return on my investment?
Yeah.
How would you go about looking at the return on their investment? What data would you ask them for, or what information would you request to see whether they are getting a good return on their investment?
Yeah, and I think it's difficult from a return on investment point of view, because there's not a kind of an easy way of saying, okay, we've invested £10,000 into benefits and we can see that we've got £12,000 out. But I think there are definitely some metrics that can be used around that. So I think employee surveys are really important to kind of, like you say, ask employees what they actually value. If most of the population don't appreciate the kind of enhanced pension that you've got, then you're kind of essentially wasting money, and there may be a better way of structuring that then some of the money that was invested into pension can be spent on other benefits. I think, in terms of other ways of doing it, so I think, like I say, employee surveys, so they can be either kind of pulse surveys, part of a kind of wider engagement survey, or a specific benefit survey. I think having focus groups as well to kind of actually get into the kind of nitty gritty of what's going on with benefits and what's important to employees is really good. I think there are some metrics that you can see that actually if you start spending money on well-being and wellness, is there then a decrease in absenteeism? Is there an increase in productivity? Is there a change in terms of retaining employees? Are people like staying longer? And also, I think it's always really useful whenever we're going to a company is to speak to recruitment teams or the talent acquisition team, just to understand how they're, is it easy for them to attract talent, or are they kind of struggling when it comes to benefits? So I think kind of getting a whole picture of all of those pieces helps to kind of say, okay, the money that we are spending is being valued by employees or not, and what would they value more than what they're currently spending. But I think as well, you kind of, sorry, do you point about Gen Z? From what we've kind of seen is that there's definitely a push of, like, from research that actually they seem to be more values driven as well. So and far more interested in the kind of benefit side rather than the kind of compensation. Obviously, compensation is always important, but what I've seen from having focus groups is, as long as the company culture and the benefits are really good, employees are often kind of willing to kind of take a bit of a hit in terms of salary. So maybe 5,000, 10,000 under, on a kind of £45,000 role, are willing to kind of take a bit of a hit on the salary if the culture and all the rest of that and the ways of working are kind of aligned with theirs. So it's really interesting kind of seeing how the demographics are changing and how people, cash is obviously always important, but the benefits can really help retain employees and keep people engaged within the business as well.
Yeah, I mean, I remember reading this research, which aligns with what you've just said, that the Gen Z employees are the first generation that would actually sacrifice pay to work in an organization where they can identify with their values and have that sense of belonging.
Yeah.
And, I always say that pay is something that can attract you to an organization, but once you're there, people you take it for granted, don't you? Because it's your monthly paycheck, and it's not really something that's going to engage you or motivate you. It could demotivate you if you're not paid fairly, but it's really the benefits that then keeps you engaged and the culture. So if we look at the benefits and how employees are valuing it, you talked earlier about surveys, and so I wanted to ask you, what is the best way to use these surveys? Because I think, a challenge that you can have is if you ask with any sort of surveys, you survey employees and you ask them for their opinion, and then you're not able to implement some of them, and they think, well, why did you ask me for my opinion if you're not doing anything with it? So I guess one danger of asking employees about what are the benefits that they like, and they give a long list of benefits that they want or like, and you're unable to implement them, then that could actually work against you. So what would you say is the best way to gather feedback or ask employees about what are the benefits that they value?
Yeah, and that's such a good point. I think, you should really ensure that before you go out with a survey that you are ready to kind of take action and there is budget there. And because, yeah, absolutely, if there's no action taken, that can have such a negative impact on employees, especially if you're, sending a company-wide survey. So I suppose, first of all, kind of potentially look at focus groups, so some kind of trusted employees that you can kind of have a discussion and ask them, what they value, how they feel about the current benefits. I think there's also ways of wording the surveys so it's not just kind of a shopping list of, okay, what benefits would you like? What do you want us to do? I think, employees understand that there are budgetary constraints. So you can almost kind of have would you rather 1% extra in your pension or private medical insurance, and almost give employees options so you can kind of see, and especially if you're kind of collating it, that you can then see, okay, so this demographic prefer the pension, this demographic prefer gym membership, and then you can look at it from there and see actually, which of the benefits do the employees prefer, rather than just saying, okay, you've got kind of carte blanche to kind of create your own benefits package. I think as well, there's so much that can be done around benefits that are really low cost. So I think kind of almost highlighting those of things like the gym membership. If you use a set different providers, you can get that almost free. So there's no cost to the company, but it's, giving employees like 20%, 30% off gym memberships. So there's so much that can be done low cost. So I think it's kind of almost highlighting those and kind of having those in the survey rather than just the kind of higher ticket item. So, do you want an extra 3% in your pension? Do you want private medical insurance? Kind of looking at that kind of breadth of different costs and benefits as well.
When we I mean, there's so much interesting stuff that we can talk about in benefits, and I think one of the things that I definitely want to know, and I am sure some of the people listening might be interested in, is how the benefits you think are going to evolve in the future. So if we think about the last 10, 20 years, the way the benefits were evolving back then was organizations were moving towards having a platform, for example, to introduce flexible benefits, allowing employees to opt in, opt out of different benefits, or having even in some cases, an allowance that they could apply to different sort of benefits. how are you now seeing, is that still the way forward for organizations, or are you seeing even more innovation or other things that some organizations are introducing to make the benefits more attractive? And if so, can you give an example of like something really innovative that you've come across?
Yeah, so I think, like you say, the kind of flex platforms are really kind of key to offering a variety of benefits that kind of work across all demographics, and having that choice. And I think the choice is going to become more and more important, especially as we were saying with kind of Gen Z and being far more values driven. So I think there's a huge around the value side of things and ensuring that the benefits are ticking those boxes. So things like ethical pensions and volunteering and all of those kind of things. I think it's interesting from an allowance point of view. I think lots of companies kind of introduce the allowances because they're kind of struggling with the costs of the benefits. I think if they're done well, they can be really, really good, really beneficial to employees. And I think, from a well-being perspective, not everyone might want to go to the gym, but everyone might want to get some trainers so they can go out walking and get exercise that way, or find a meditation app or something like that. So I think the allowances can be really useful in terms of offering a variety of well-being sources that can be then tailored to individuals' needs. In terms of looking forward, I think definitely seeing lots of insurers providing lower cost options. So there's now, like, say, medical insurance, there's always kind of slightly pared back from what you would traditionally kind of know as a kind of insurance policy. Lots of insurers are kind of looking down that road, and maybe kind of a hybrid between the cash plan and the kind of medical insurance. The other thing that I'm seeing is insurers kind of focusing on smaller employers and kind of helping them get into the market, because I think there's certainly kind of like the kind of smaller end of SMEs traditionally kind of struggle with the cost because they've got such a small group of employees, where now I'm definitely seeing much easier for companies in that size to purchase benefits in the first place and kind of get into that kind of market. So yeah, I think it'll be interesting over the kind of next few years to see how things develop, but it's definitely, individuality and kind of be able to kind of design your own benefits, whether that's kind of through flexible benefits portals or allowances or all of that. I think it's so important to give employees the flexibility and the choice of benefits that they can tailor to themselves.
Yeah, I think that's the key word there is the choice, isn't it? Because it's that's often what can create value in itself without even having to spend any money on the benefits, is just giving people the choice. So instead of having, a big set of core benefits that everyone gets, having a slightly longer list, but allowing that choice. So you end up spending the same, but with that choice, you get that better return on your investment.
Yeah, and I think as well, lots of the benefits, that kind of choice and having that kind of list that people can choose from, they don't even necessarily have to have a cost. I think often it's just offering discounted rates with providers that employees then feel, okay, well, we're getting this cheaper than if we went to buy it ourselves. So things like, it's not particularly exciting, but things like will writing, having that you can have deducted from your salary. So you're saving money because the company's buying in bulk, and then you're splitting the costs over 12 months. So things like that. And obviously things like electric vehicles as well, which employees can make huge savings, and employers can make savings on national insurance. And yeah, I think as well, it's really like things like holiday purchase and the cash plan are benefits that kind of can be suited to anyone, regardless of their kind of age or demographic. So I think, like you say, potentially moving away from such a rigid set of core benefits and having those, some obviously kind of have some protections in place, but then on top of that, having the benefits that are interesting to everyone, and then having the list that then people can tailor what they've got, and yeah, it doesn't have to cost anything to implement those.
Well, thanks so much, Emma, for joining me today and providing all your insights. If our listeners want to get in touch with you, what is the best way to connect with you?
So you can connect on LinkedIn, so Emma Cowling, or through my website, so refreshreward.consulting.
Great, thanks. And I can't let you go without asking the question that I ask all my guests, because I am a film enthusiast. And so my question is, what is your favorite film and why?
Yeah, so I am absolutely rubbish at watching films and like rarely go to cinema, but probably the last film that I saw was Bridget Jones recently in cinema, or Wicked, which I saw a couple of weeks ago. So yeah, which was absolutely amazing. So yeah, looking forward to the second part of that.
Yeah, I have to say it's I haven't seen Bridget Jones, but I did go and see Wicked, which was surprisingly better than I thought it would be.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it was some very good acting in there as well.
Yeah.
So there's an unexpected recommendation from me for everyone. And so thanks everyone for listening. And I hope you'll tune in for the next episode of A Case of the Mondays.
You've been listening to A Case of the Mondays. Feel free to share this episode with anyone you think might find it useful. Similarly, if you have any questions about what we've discussed today or would like to suggest a topic for future episodes, get in touch by emailing podcast@3r-strategy.com or head over to 3r-strategy.com to sign up to our mailing list for regular news and updates.